Vancouver began as a lumber town carved from dense Pacific Northwest forest, but it didn't stay small for long. Its deep natural harbour, the arrival of the Transcontinental Railroad, and its position as Canada's Pacific Gateway turned it into one of the most important cities in Western Canada. In this reconstruction, we're using historic photographs, maps, and records to step back into Vancouver's dramatic early years. If you enjoy this kind of historical exploration, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with your suggestions for the next city or time period you'd like to explore. Vancouver in 1886 was barely more than a frontier settlement called Granville, nicknamed Gastown, after John Gassy Jack Dayton, a talkative saloonkeeper who arrived in 1867. Built on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, the area had supported indigenous communities for thousands of years before European contact. The settlement grew around Hastings Mill, a lumber operation established in 1865 that shipped timber across the Pacific. At this stage, Vancouver had no grand buildings. Most structures were simple wooden affairs scattered along muddy streets near the waterfront. The town's layout was shaped by the mill, the harbour, and the towering forest that pressed in from all sides. On April 6, 1886, with barely 1,000 residents, the settlement officially incorporated as a city. The new city council chose the name Vancouver after Captain George Vancouver, who had surveyed these waters in 1792. Mayor Malcolm McLean presided over a town of rough-hewn ambition. The Canadian Pacific Railway had chosen this location as its western terminus, promising to transform the backwoods port into Canada's Pacific Gateway. Everything seemed possible. Then came June 13, 1886. Just 2 months after incorporation, a land-clearing fire set by railway workers escaped control. Driven by strong winds through tinder-dry slash piles and timber, the flames raced through the young city with terrifying speed. Within 45 minutes, nearly the entire town was gone. The Great Fire of 1886 killed between 21 and 28 people and destroyed virtually every building. Survivors plunged into Burrard Inlet and False Creek to escape the inferno. When the smoke cleared, only a handful of structures remained standing, including the Hastings Mill store and the Regina Hotel. The city was ash and ruin, but Vancouver rebuilt immediately. Within days, construction began again. This time, the city required fireproof materials. Brick replaced wood. Streets were widened and properly surveyed. What could have been Vancouver's end became its beginning. The Great Fire forced the young city to build properly from the start, creating a more permanent urban foundation. By 1887, the first transcontinental passenger train arrived from Montreal, completing the Canadian Pacific Railway's coast-to-coast link. The moment was transformative. Vancouver was no longer an isolated lumber town, but the western anchor of a national transportation system. The railway brought settlers, capital, and commerce flooding into the city. Land values soared. New businesses opened weekly. The harbour began handling goods destined for Asia and Australia, positioning Vancouver as Canada's Pacific trading hub. The city's growth was explosive. By 1891, just 5 years after incorporation, Vancouver's population had grown to over 13,000. The street grid expanded rapidly away from the waterfront. Granville Street became the main commercial corridor, lined with shops, hotels, and offices built in the solid brick style that defined post-fire Vancouver. The West End developed as an upscale residential neighbourhood, while working-class districts grew near the mills and rail yards. This period saw the construction of landmarks that would define the city for generations. The Fairmont Hotel Vancouver opened in 1887 as the city's first major hotel, serving railway passengers and establishing Vancouver as a destination. The Vancouver Opera House opened in 1891, bringing culture to the frontier. City Hall was built in 1899, a grand Victorian structure that announced Vancouver's civic maturity. These weren't temporary frontier buildings. They were statements of permanence and confidence. The harbour became the engine of Vancouver's economy. Hastings Mill expanded dramatically, joined by other lumber operations along False Creek and Burrard Inlet. Grain elevators rose along the waterfront to handle prairie wheat destined for Asian markets. The Canadian Pacific Railway built massive dock facilities at the foot of Granville Street, where steamships departed for Hong Kong, Shanghai, Yokohama, and Sydney. By the 1890s, Vancouver handled more Pacific trade than any other Canadian port. Immigration transformed the city's character. Chinese workers who had built the railway settled in a growing Chinatown district, facing severe discrimination, but establishing businesses and community institutions. Japanese immigrants arrived to work in fishing and lumber. European settlers came from Britain, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, drawn by jobs and cheap land. By 1901, Vancouver's population had exploded to over 27,000, making it one of the fastest-growing cities in North America. The city's natural setting shaped its development in distinctive ways. Stanley Park, a 1,000-acre peninsula of old-growth forest, was designated as a public park in 1888, preserving wilderness at the city's edge. English Bay and the beaches along the West End became recreational areas where residents could escape urban life within minutes. The North Shore Mountains provided a dramatic backdrop visible from downtown streets, a constant reminder of the wilderness Vancouver had been carved from. By 1900, Vancouver bore little resemblance to the lumber camp of 1886. Electric streetcars replaced horse-drawn transport. Electric lights illuminated downtown streets. Telephone lines connected businesses. The city had a modern water system, professional fire department, and organized police force. Multi-story brick and stone buildings lined Granville and Hastings streets. The harbor bristled with ships from around the world. Vancouver's rise in just 14 years was extraordinary, even by frontier standards. The combination of railway access, a world-class natural harbor, proximity to Asian markets, and abundant natural resources created conditions for explosive growth. From ashes and ambition, Vancouver had become Canada's gateway to the Pacific, a fully realized city at the edge of the continent, ready to meet the 20th century.